The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anticipation. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes, and spectators filled every available seat. The case was simple on the surface, a lawsuit against Keanu Reeves for a minor mistake on set, but its true significance wasn't lost on anyone. When a celebrity steps into the courtroom, the world watches. Keanu sat at the defendant's table, as calm as ever. His face, always so composed, gave nothing away. His suit was sharp, his posture perfect, but inside, there was a storm brewing. Today wasn't just about a legal dispute. It was about something much bigger. He wasn't just fighting a case, he was fighting the perception that came with his fame. The judge, however, seemed intent on making it personal. Judge Walter Daniels was known for his sharp wit and even sharper tongue. He'd been in the legal world for decades, and in his eyes, Keanu Reeves was nothing more than a pretty face who'd gotten lucky in Hollywood. "Mr. Reeves," the judge began, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he leaned forward, "I assume you're more familiar with the script than the law. This isn't a movie set. There are no directors here to tell you what to say." A ripple of laughter ran through the courtroom. Keanu didn't flinch. He'd been in the public eye long enough to know how to deal with cheap jabs. His gaze remained steady, focused. He knew the judge was baiting him, trying to provoke a reaction. Keanu's lawyer, standing beside him, seemed on edge, glancing nervously between the judge and Keanu. But the actor didn't react. He was used to people underestimating him. He wasn't just the guy who played John Wick or Neo. He wasn't just the nice guy everyone seemed to love. He had a side most people didn't know about. A side he kept hidden for years. "Mr. Reeves, I hope you understand that this court doesn't care about your Hollywood persona. You're here as a defendant. Not as a star," Judge Daniels continued, his voice louder now, for effect. "Now, would you like to tell us how someone who's never stepped foot in a law school intends to defend themselves in a court of law?" The words hung in the air, thick with mockery. The judge's tone made it clear he thought Keanu was out of his depth. Keanu didn't flinch. He wasn't about to be rattled. With a deep breath, he folded his hands on the table, his eyes never leaving the judge's. "I'm here to defend myself in the way the law allows," Keanu said, his voice low and steady. "And I'll let the facts speak for themselves." The room quieted. The judge's face twisted into a sneer, clearly unconvinced. "We'll see about that," he said, turning his attention to the witness stand. Keanu sat back, his mind working quietly. To the casual observer, he was just another actor who had gotten himself into a mess. But beneath the calm exterior, he was calculating every move. He knew this was his chance to prove something far more important than his innocence. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. A voice interrupted the tension, breaking the moment. "This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?" Keanu didn't answer. He didn't need to. The story was just beginning, and the courtroom was about to learn more than they ever expected from the man sitting quietly at the defendant's table. The courtroom was silent except for the soft rustle of papers and the occasional clink of a pen on the table. The energy had shifted. Judge Daniels' biting sarcasm had only fueled the quiet resolve in Keanu. With every word from the judge, it seemed the gap between expectation and reality grew wider. Keanu's lawyer, Thomas Lowell, had tried to start the defense with a clear and reasonable argument. The lawsuit was about a minor mistake on set, something that had been blown out of proportion. The film's producers and crew had already settled matters amicably, but the plaintiff, an extras coordinator, had pressed forward with the case. But the judge was having none of it. "Mr. Lowell," Judge Daniels said with a dismissive wave of his hand, "I've heard all the lawyer talk before. Let's see if your client can do better than parroted legal jargon." He turned to Keanu with a mocking expression. "What do you say, Mr. Reeves? Do you have something worthwhile to contribute, or do we just continue watching you squirm in your seat? Keanu's face remained unchanged. His calm, almost detached demeanor was his shield. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like he was simply a quiet, well-mannered actor caught in an unfortunate situation. But beneath the surface, Keanu was calculating, drawing on every bit of his knowledge, not just of acting, but of law. It was a secret few knew. Keanu had spent years learning about the legal world, far beyond the typical understanding of an actor. In fact, he'd spent months poring over case law, attending lectures, and sitting in on legal hearings when he wasn't filming. He wasn't just here as a defendant, he was here as someone who understood how the game was played. And now, as the judge continued to take jabs at him, Keanu felt a shift inside. It wasn't anger that pushed him forward. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he wasn't the one being fooled. The judge's mocking tone continued, but Keanu remained composed. He listened carefully as Lowell presented the facts of the case, but with each passing moment, Keanu knew what was coming. He wasn't here to simply sit back and let things unfold. He was about to step in, and when he did, everyone would understand just how out of their depth they really were. And then, it happened. The judge, as expected, took another shot at Keanu, his words dripping with ridicule. "Mr. Reeves," Judge Daniels said, leaning forward, "do you understand the gravity of this situation? Or are you still under the impression that your fame will magically resolve everything? If you think that just looking good on screen is going to save you today, you're mistaken." The courtroom was tense. Keanu's lawyer exchanged a glance with him, concern written all over his face. This wasn't going well. But Keanu didn't seem to notice. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. A few murmurs rippled through the room. "Your Honor," Keanu said, his voice steady, yet filled with quiet intensity, "I do understand the gravity of the situation. And I intend to resolve it." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. This was new. Most defendants would have flinched under the pressure by now. Not Keanu. He wasn't reacting to the judge's insults, he was simply taking control. "I'm not here to entertain you with movie lines or to prove that I'm a good guy. I'm here because the facts matter," Keanu continued. "And the facts are that I'm not just some actor who's stumbled into trouble. I've read the case law. I've studied the precedents. And I'm ready to make my defense." There was a stunned silence. The spectators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge's expression faltered for a moment, and Keanu's lawyer seemed caught between disbelief and admiration. Keanu walked over to the table and calmly picked up a thick folder of documents. He slid it across to the judge, who stared down at it, confused. "This is a legal precedent," Keanu said. "It's a case from several years ago involving an almost identical situation. It might not have made headlines, but it's relevant. I think you'll find the comparison quite telling." Judge Daniels flipped through the papers, his face slowly losing its smugness. The courtroom held its breath as the judge read through the documents. Keanu's lawyer stood to the side, his eyes wide, unsure of what was coming next. "Mr. Reeves," Judge Daniels finally said, his voice now laced with a touch of hesitation, "I wasn't aware you were familiar with case law. But let's see how far this takes you." He glanced up from the papers, clearly caught off guard. "Continue." Keanu nodded, his calm demeanor never faltering. As he continued his argument, it was clear that his understanding of the law far surpassed anyone's expectations. The judge's ridicule had been met with solid, well-researched legal tactics. And for the first time that day, the judge seemed unsure of himself. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Keanu was no longer just a defendant. He was a force to be reckoned with. The judge, though still unwilling to admit defeat, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Keanu wasn't just playing a role, he was rewriting the narrative. And as the trial continued, it was clear that no one, least of all the judge, knew what was about to happen next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The voice in the background cut in again. Do you think Keanu's going to pull off a miracle, or is this trial about to take a darker turn? The stakes were rising, and the courtroom was about to see a whole new side of Keanu Reeves. The courtroom was on edge, the air crackling with a tension no one could ignore. Judge Daniels had shifted from his earlier mocking tone to something more cautious, and for the first time in the trial, the crowd seemed to be leaning forward, eager to see what would happen next. Keanu Reeves, the actor they all thought they knew, had just delivered a powerful legal argument. The courtroom, filled with seasoned lawyers and legal experts, was stunned into silence. Keanu stood at the defendant's table, his posture as poised as ever. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile or make any dramatic gestures. He simply returned to his seat and waited. His lawyer, Thomas Lowell, was at a loss for words. It wasn't the first time Keanu had surprised him, but it was the first time Keanu had revealed just how much he'd been preparing for this moment. "Mr. Reeves," the judge finally said, his voice now measured, "I'm going to allow your argument to stand for the time being. But don't mistake my leniency for respect." He slammed his gavel down, signaling the end of the morning session. "We'll reconvene in 1 hour." The room buzzed as the judge left the bench, and Keanu's lawyer quickly turned to him. "Keanu, I had no idea you'd been preparing like this. Where did all that legal knowledge come from?" Keanu gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I've always been interested in law," he said softly. "It started as a hobby, something to occupy my mind during long breaks on set. But over time, I realized there was more to it. I've spent years reading legal cases, attending lectures, and learning from lawyers. It seemed like the right time to put it to use." Thomas shook his head in disbelief. "I mean, you could have been a lawyer yourself. You know that, right?" Keanu shrugged, as if it were no big deal. It wasn't about becoming a lawyer. It was about understanding the system. And now, it's about proving something more important than a legal case. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" Keanu's gaze drifted toward the judge, who was now conversing with the other attorneys. "It's about showing people who I really am. Not just the guy who plays action heroes, but someone who knows what they're doing, who's prepared. I don't want to be underestimated." Thomas seemed to absorb Keanu's words, a new understanding dawning on him. Keanu wasn't just fighting a case, he was fighting the perception that surrounded him, the shallow judgments people had about him based on his fame. The courtroom reconvened an hour later, and the atmosphere was different. The judge returned to the bench, his earlier confidence shaken. He glanced over at Keanu, his eyes lingering for a moment before he called the session to order. "Let's continue," Judge Daniels said, his tone more neutral than before. "Mr. Reeves, I assume you have more to add." Keanu stood, his movements calm and deliberate. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The moment was his to shape. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and confident. "I'd like to present a new piece of evidence." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Keanu's lawyer exchanged a glance with him, his expression filled with both admiration and concern. No one expected Keanu to pull out more surprises, but here he was, ready to turn the tide once again. Keanu walked over to the evidence table and placed a stack of papers before the judge. "This is a legal brief I prepared, outlining a precedent that directly applies to this case. I believe it clarifies the matter and demonstrates that the plaintiff's case doesn't hold up under scrutiny." Judge Daniels picked up the documents, his eyes scanning the pages with a renewed sense of attention. The crowd watched as the judge's brow furrowed, the earlier arrogance gone from his face. Keanu's defense wasn't just clever, it was airtight. "Mr. Reeves," the judge said after a long pause, "this is impressive. But don't think that means I'll go easy on you. I still have my doubts." Keanu nodded, not intimidated by the judge's words. "I wouldn't expect you to. But I'm confident in the facts. And facts matter, Your Honor." The judge didn't respond. He simply nodded slowly, acknowledging the force of Keanu's argument, even if he wasn't quite ready to admit it. The tension in the room was palpable, the power dynamics shifting. Keanu wasn't the laughing stock he had been when he first entered the courtroom. He was no longer just an actor. He was an equal in this battle, someone who had earned his place through knowledge and preparation. As the session continued, Keanu's quiet resolve was the driving force of the defense. He didn't need to raise his voice or show any emotion. His presence, his knowledge, and his unwavering confidence spoke for him. The judge's earlier ridicule had turned into begrudging respect. It was clear that Keanu had caught everyone off guard. The question now wasn't whether he could win the case, it was whether the judge would be willing to admit just how wrong he had been about Keanu all along. Outside the courtroom, the story was beginning to take shape. News outlets began to report on the unexpected turn of events. Keanu Reeves, the actor known for his kind nature and action roles, was now at the center of a courtroom drama that no one had predicted. People began to talk, not just about his legal knowledge, but about the quiet determination that had gotten him this far. The tide was turning, but no one knew just how far Keanu would take this. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The narrator's voice chimed in, breaking the tense atmosphere. Keanu's legal battle is only getting started. What do you think? Can a man with fame and power really change the course of this trial? Stay tuned for the next shocking move. The courtroom fell silent once again, the stage set for what was sure to be the most unexpected twist of all. The tension in the courtroom was thick, almost suffocating. The judge sat with his gavel resting in front of him, flipping through the legal brief Keanu had submitted with a newfound wariness. It was as though the entire room was holding its breath, waiting for the next move in this unprecedented legal battle. Keanu stood by quietly, his eyes focused, his body language calm yet alert. The last few hours had shaken everyone's expectations, especially the judge's. What was supposed to be a straightforward case involving a small mistake on a movie set was quickly turning into a spectacle that no one saw coming. The judge finally broke the silence, his voice measured but still carrying an air of skepticism. "Mr. Reeves," he began, his gaze not quite meeting Keanu's, "I have to admit, your legal argument has more substance than I expected. But I'll remind you that the law is not about what's fair, it's about what can be proven." Keanu nodded, acknowledging the point without responding. He knew better than anyone that the law was about hard facts and even harder evidence. And though the judge may have been unconvinced by his earlier arguments, Keanu knew they were just getting started. However, the judge continued, "I'm still inclined to view this as a simple misunderstanding, a minor issue blown out of proportion. It's not something that should be dragging us into the headlines. So, unless you have more to add, we may move toward closing arguments." Keanu's lawyer, Thomas Lowell, shifted nervously beside him, as if he had expected the judge to wrap things up. But Keanu wasn't done yet. He knew the truth was far from what anyone had assumed, and now, it was time for everyone in the courtroom to understand just how deep the case really went. Keanu stood up once more, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady and calm, "I do have one more piece of evidence to present." The judge looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. "Another piece of evidence, Mr. Reeves? What could you possibly have now?" Keanu didn't answer immediately. He glanced toward his lawyer, who looked as though he was about to protest, but Keanu motioned for him to stay quiet. This was his move, not anyone else's. Slowly, Keanu reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file, thick with documents. He laid it down on the table and slid it over to the judge. "What is this?" the judge asked, still looking irritated. "Another precedent you've pulled from nowhere?" Keanu didn't respond to the question directly. Instead, he let the documents speak for themselves. The judge flipped through the file, his frown deepening as he scanned the contents. The room was dead silent, the only sound the occasional rustle of paper. As the judge's eyes widened with recognition, the atmosphere shifted again. The edge of skepticism was gone, replaced by something else: curiosity, disbelief, and maybe even a hint of fear. Keanu hadn't just found another legal case to back up his argument, he'd found something that completely changed the nature of the case. "This is," the judge muttered, his voice trailing off as he glanced at Keanu. "This is a whistleblower report." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes unwavering. "Yes. This document was filed by someone involved in the production of the film. It outlines not only the incident in question, but also several others that were deliberately covered up." The courtroom gasped collectively, the spectators in the gallery leaning forward as if to catch every word. Keanu continued, his voice steady but filled with the weight of the revelation. "It's not just about a small mistake. The incident was part of a larger pattern, one that affects not just my career, but the careers of many people in this industry. What was supposed to be a simple dispute over an accident was being used to silence those who tried to speak up about the mismanagement and exploitation on set." Judge Daniels stood motionless, his eyes scanning the document with growing disbelief. The entire case had just turned upside down. The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Keanu's lawyer was the first to break the silence, his voice barely above a whisper as he turned to Keanu. This could change everything. Keanu, why didn't you mention this before?" Keanu glanced at his lawyer, his gaze serious. "I needed to wait for the right moment. I wasn't going to use it unless I had no other choice." The judge, finally processing the gravity of the situation, cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, if what you're saying is true, then this is no longer just a personal matter between you and the plaintiff. This could be a case involving criminal activity." Keanu nodded again, his face impassive. "I'm aware." The room was silent again, the weight of the new evidence sinking in. This wasn't just a minor legal issue, it was the beginning of a much larger story that no one, not even the judge, had expected. Keanu hadn't just been defending himself. He'd been uncovering something far more significant, something that could change the course of Hollywood forever. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, the voice in the background announced, breaking the tension once again. What do you think? Was this a masterstroke by Keanu Reeves, or is there something darker lurking beneath the surface? The courtroom had no answers yet, but it was clear that the trial was far from over. What had started as a case about a small mistake had now evolved into something much more dangerous, and much more personal. And for Keanu, this was just the beginning. The real battle was about to start. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. What began as a mundane legal matter had morphed into a firestorm that no one saw coming. The judge, once smug and dismissive, now stood with a furrowed brow, overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation. The room buzzed with hushed conversations, each person trying to process the shocking turn of events. Keanu Reeves, the quiet defendant who had been ridiculed just days earlier, was now standing at the epicenter of a much larger storm. Keanu's lawyer, Thomas Lowell, stood beside him, trying to conceal the awe in his eyes. He had known Keanu to be full of surprises, but this was different. The evidence Keanu had just presented, whistleblower reports, hidden corruption, and a string of incidents covered up by the film industry, had completely changed the game. Judge Daniels, who had been the primary antagonist in this case, now sat with a noticeable shift in posture. He was no longer the omnipotent figure who could dictate the flow of the courtroom. Keanu had taken that power back, and with it, he was about to reveal more than just the truth behind a single lawsuit. The courtroom fell into a heavy silence, with only the soft shuffle of papers breaking it. Keanu didn't feel the need to speak. He had already said more than enough. What had begun as a simple argument had now become a stand against the very system that had been silently harming people for years. Keanu Reeves was no longer fighting for himself, he was fighting for everyone who had been silenced, for everyone who had been ignored in the pursuit of fame and fortune. But it wasn't just the courtroom that was being affected. Word was quickly spreading beyond these walls. News outlets had picked up on the case, and Keanu's name was now being shared across social media platforms. The world was watching, and what they were seeing wasn't the typical Hollywood narrative. Keanu had always been more than just a pretty face on the silver screen. He had an inner strength that many didn't understand, and now that strength was on full display. The public was beginning to see him in an entirely new light, not just as an actor, but as a man willing to stand up for what was right, even when it meant putting everything on the line. "Your Honor," Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm yet carrying the weight of everything that had transpired. "The evidence speaks for itself. This isn't just about one person's grievance. This is about a systemic issue that affects the lives of many, people who never had the platform to speak out. I wasn't trying to win a simple lawsuit. I'm trying to expose something that needs to be brought to light." Judge Daniels, visibly shaken, took a long breath and set the evidence aside. I didn't expect this," he admitted, his voice quiet but firm. "You've caught me off guard, Mr. Reeves. This case is no longer a personal matter. This has turned into something much larger than I ever imagined." Keanu nodded, understanding the weight of the judge's words. He didn't need any more validation. The wheels of change had already begun turning. The court, the media, the public, everything was beginning to shift. But just as the tide was turning in Keanu's favor, the emotional weight of the situation began to creep in. Keanu's thoughts briefly flashed back to the moment when he had first decided to take legal action. It wasn't about winning, it was about doing the right thing. He had spent years watching the corruption and exploitation in the entertainment industry, but it wasn't until now, when it directly impacted the lives of people he knew, that he had finally decided to take a stand. He had always been a man of few words, but now his actions spoke volumes. He had seen firsthand how easy it was for the system to overlook those who didn't have a voice. And he wasn't about to let that continue, not on his watch. As the judge called for a brief recess, Keanu remained standing, lost in his own thoughts. The reality of what he had just done, the risks he had taken, was beginning to hit him. This wasn't just about one person or one case. This was about changing the way people viewed the power structures that had governed Hollywood for years. It was a daunting realization, but Keanu wasn't afraid. He had spent his life making difficult choices, whether it was turning down major roles, staying out of the spotlight, or prioritizing kindness and authenticity over fame. He had always been willing to do the right thing, no matter the cost. But this was different. This was bigger. As Keanu stood in the courtroom, he could feel the weight of the eyes upon him, the reporters, the spectators, his lawyer, and even the judge. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Would Keanu continue to push forward, exposing the dark side of Hollywood? Or would he back down, realizing that the cost of victory might be too high? It was a question that didn't need to be answered just yet. Keanu wasn't in this for the accolades or the recognition. He was in it because, in that moment, he knew the truth needed to be told. And whatever happened after this, whatever the fallout may be, he was ready. The judge returned to the bench, his demeanor slightly more subdued, and everyone took their seats. The room was still buzzing with uncertainty, but now, it wasn't just about the case. It was about something much more profound, the possibility of a change that would ripple far beyond this courtroom. Keanu's lawyer leaned in, his voice barely a whisper. "Keanu, no matter how this turns out, you've already made an impact. You've forced the world to look at things it didn't want to see." Keanu gave a faint smile, his eyes distant but resolute. "We've only just begun." And with that, the battle continued. The emotional climax was not just a single moment in court, it was the start of something that would change the way people viewed both Keanu Reeves and the system he was challenging. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The narrator's voice once again cut through the tension. What do you think? Is Keanu Reeves going to expose a Hollywood scandal? Or will the powerful forces that have kept this secret buried finally catch up to him? Stay tuned for the next shocking twist. Keanu had entered this fight as an underdog, but with every word, every piece of evidence, he was inching closer to victory. The world was watching. And there was no turning back now. The courtroom had never felt so charged. With every passing second, the stakes grew higher, and the weight of Keanu's revelation began to settle over everyone present. The once relaxed judge, now visibly affected by the unfolding scandal, tapped his gavel, calling for order as the spectators continued to murmur. Outside the courthouse, news vans had gathered, and reporters from every major outlet had descended upon the scene. Social media was ablaze with posts, hashtags, and live feeds. Keanu Reeves, who had once been just a beloved Hollywood star, was now at the center of a storm that threatened to shake the entertainment industry to its core. Inside the courtroom, Keanu remained poised, standing as the waves of attention washed over him. He wasn't the type of person to seek out the spotlight, but there was something undeniable about the gravity of what he was doing. His calm demeanor had an almost magnetic effect on the room. It wasn't arrogance, it was something deeper, something unshakable. The judge cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control over the proceedings. "Mr. Reeves," he began, addressing Keanu with a more somber tone than before. "I'm afraid that the situation has become far more complicated than anticipated. If this whistleblower report proves accurate, the implications for the film industry and the people involved are far-reaching. I would be remiss if I didn't fully acknowledge the weight of what we're facing here." Keanu simply nodded, his expression unchanged. "I'm aware, Your Honor. But if the truth has consequences, then I think it's time for those consequences to be faced. The people who have suffered need to be heard." Judge Daniels took a moment, his hand resting on the gavel, before speaking again. "We are going to need to review this evidence in detail. This case will now be put on hold for a full investigation. It's no longer about a single lawsuit. We need to examine the broader allegations that have been brought to light. This is no longer just about you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu's lawyer, Thomas Lowell, shot him a concerned glance, but Keanu wasn't worried. He had expected this. What he hadn't expected was how quickly the world was waking up to the systemic issues he was exposing. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a movement, one that had the potential to ignite change far beyond the courtroom walls. "Your Honor," Lowell said cautiously, "we're ready to cooperate with any investigation. But Keanu is right, this isn't just a matter of a single film set. The bigger picture has to be addressed. And if it means bringing Hollywood's darkest secrets to light, then we'll do it. We have nothing to hide." The room went still. The words "Hollywood's darkest secrets" seemed to hang in the air like a weight, settling over everyone in the room. The judge glanced between Keanu and his lawyer, contemplating the magnitude of what was being said. A few seconds of silence passed before Judge Daniels finally spoke. "Very well. We will adjourn for the time being. But I expect full cooperation from both parties. The investigation will begin immediately, and I'm sure you realize, Mr. Reeves, that this is now a matter that could reach beyond the confines of this courtroom." Keanu nodded. It wasn't just about the legal ramifications anymore, it was about the lasting impact this case could have on the industry, on his peers, and on everyone who had ever suffered in silence behind the scenes. As the gavel struck, signaling the recess, Keanu felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He'd fought countless battles in his career, physical, emotional, and professional, but none of them had felt as important as this one. It wasn't just his reputation at stake anymore. It was the truth, and the lives of countless others who had been crushed under the weight of an industry that only cared about money, power, and image. As Keanu walked out of the courtroom, a flood of reporters descended on him, cameras flashing and microphones thrusting toward his face. "Keanu, do you have any comment on the latest revelations?" one reporter shouted. "Is Hollywood really as corrupt as it's being portrayed?" Keanu paused for a moment, letting the reporters settle, before speaking into the microphone. "What I revealed today is just the beginning," he said, his voice steady. "There are many people who have suffered because of what's been allowed to happen. This case isn't just mine, it's for everyone who has ever been silenced or ignored." The camera shutters clicked as he turned away, his words lingering in the air. Keanu had already won the battle. The truth was out. Now, all that remained was for the world to see how deep the rabbit hole went. As Keanu walked toward the waiting car, his lawyer, Thomas Lowell, caught up to him. "Keanu, are you sure about this? What happens next? You've got the attention of every major news outlet, and the investigation is about to unfold. This is no longer a simple lawsuit." Keanu paused, glancing at his lawyer. "It never was, Tom. It wasn't about the lawsuit. It was always about something bigger." Lowell sighed, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. "You've just opened a door that can never be closed again. You do realize that, right? This won't just affect the film industry, it'll affect every industry where corruption thrives in silence." Keanu looked back at him, his eyes unwavering. "I've always believed in standing up for what's right. If it means taking this all the way, then I'm ready. It's not about what happens to me, it's about making sure the next generation of filmmakers and workers doesn't have to suffer the same way." As they reached the car, Keanu paused for a final moment, looking back at the courthouse. The world had changed in just a few hours. And in that moment, he realized that nothing could ever be the same again, not for him, not for Hollywood, and not for anyone who had been part of this dark secret for far too long. The battle was far from over. But Keanu Reeves had already shown that he wasn't afraid to fight for what mattered. The courtroom doors closed behind them, but the echoes of Keanu's words reverberated in the hearts of millions. What had once been an industry of glitz and glamour now stood at the crossroads of a reckoning. The world was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Would the truth continue to break free, or would the powerful forces that had protected Hollywood's secrets manage to bury it once more? Only time would tell. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, the narrator's voice echoed once again, almost teasingly. What do you think of Keanu's bold move? Can he really shake the foundations of Hollywood? Stay tuned for the next chapter in this shocking saga. The following weeks were a whirlwind for Keanu. What had started as a courtroom battle had rapidly evolved into something much larger. The media coverage surrounding the case was relentless, and soon, it wasn't just Hollywood that was paying attention. People from all walks of life were following the story, captivated by Keanu's bravery and the revelations that had been laid bare. In the midst of this chaos, Keanu found himself facing not only the full might of the film industry's elite but also a surprising turn of events. As the investigation into the corruption began, unexpected allies began to emerge, individuals who had long stayed silent, too afraid to speak out against the system that had protected them. One of the first to step forward was an unlikely figure, a well-known Hollywood producer named Olivia Masters. Olivia had been a fixture in the industry for decades, a woman who had navigated the treacherous waters of Hollywood with grace and finesse. Her name had always been synonymous with success, and her films had raked in millions. But behind the glamorous exterior, Olivia had become increasingly disillusioned by the exploitation she witnessed on a daily basis. One afternoon, as Keanu was preparing for a meeting with his legal team, he received a call from Olivia. Her voice, usually confident and composed, sounded uncharacteristically hesitant. "Keanu," she began, her tone serious, "I need to speak with you. It's about the case." And, it's about the truth that's being hidden. Keanu paused. He hadn't expected to hear from her. Olivia had always kept a safe distance from the ongoing drama in the entertainment industry, rarely getting involved in controversies. But now, something was different. There was a sense of urgency in her voice that told him this was no ordinary phone call. "Olivia, what's going on?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "I've been in this business long enough to know how things work," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I've seen the manipulation, the lies, the cover-ups. But what I'm about to tell you, what you uncovered, goes deeper than anything I've seen before. I want to help you." Keanu's mind raced. Olivia Masters was a big name, one that could move mountains in the industry. If she was willing to speak out, it could change everything. But Keanu wasn't naive. He knew that anyone who stepped into this fight would be risking a great deal. "What kind of help are we talking about?" he asked carefully. Olivia sighed. "I've been compiling evidence for years, things I knew were wrong but couldn't prove. The corruption runs all the way to the top, Keanu. And I have the proof. I've been waiting for the right moment to bring it forward, but I didn't know who I could trust, until now." Keanu was silent for a moment, processing her words. This was the kind of ally he needed, someone with insider knowledge and the courage to stand against the very system that had benefited them for so long. But it also meant that Olivia would be walking into a firestorm, and he couldn't help but feel a sense of protectiveness over her. "I'm ready," Keanu said firmly. "If you want to bring this forward, we'll do it together. But you need to understand, Olivia, this will change everything. There's no going back." "I know," she replied, her voice resolute. "But that's exactly why I'm doing this. It's time for the truth to come out." Keanu felt a weight lift off his shoulders. This was the turning point he had been waiting for. With Olivia by his side, the fight would be different. No longer would it just be about exposing the truth, it would be about dismantling the system that had allowed Hollywood's darkest secrets to thrive. The next few days were a blur as Keanu and Olivia worked together, carefully preparing their next move. Olivia brought with her a wealth of evidence, confidential emails, financial records, testimonies from former employees, and even video footage of illegal practices that had been covered up for years. It was damning, and it would be the key to exposing the corruption that had been hidden in plain sight. But even as they prepared for the next phase, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to stir up something much bigger than they anticipated. The more powerful the allies they gained, the more dangerous their position became. The industry, which had spent decades protecting its secrets, would fight back with everything it had. As they walked into the next court session, the tension was palpable. The investigation was no longer just about Keanu's case, it was about uncovering a vast network of deception that spanned years, involving some of the biggest names in the entertainment business. Olivia had given Keanu the ammunition he needed, but now the question was, who else would stand with them? And who would turn against them? The courtroom was crowded as usual, but today, the energy felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, and whispers filled the room. Word had spread about Olivia's involvement, and the media was buzzing with speculation about what was to come. Was she the final piece in the puzzle? Or was this just the beginning of a larger battle? As Keanu and Olivia took their seats, all eyes were on them. The judge called the session to order, but the weight of the moment seemed to hang in the air. The case was no longer just about a single lawsuit, it was about something far greater, something that had the potential to reshape the very fabric of the entertainment industry. And then, as if to signal the beginning of the next phase, Olivia stood up. She was ready. The truth would come out, and nothing would ever be the same again. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but strong, "I have evidence that proves the extent of the corruption that has plagued this industry. This isn't just about a few bad apples. This is about a system that has allowed this to happen for years, and it's time for it to stop." The room went silent. Keanu looked at Olivia with a sense of pride. He had no doubt that this would be a turning point, not just for his case, but for the countless others who had been victimized by the same system. They had started something that could never be undone. The battle was escalating, and Keanu knew that there was no turning back. But with Olivia at his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, the narrator's voice teased once more. What do you think? Is Keanu and Olivia's alliance enough to take down the powerful forces controlling Hollywood? Or will the industry fight back with everything it's got? Stay tuned for the next chapter. The courtroom was electric. Olivia's bold declaration had just sent shockwaves through the entire room, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The weight of the evidence she had brought with her was undeniable, but so were the forces that had kept the truth hidden for so long. Keanu felt a growing sense of determination, but also an undercurrent of fear, because he knew that what they had just started was going to change everything. Outside the courthouse, the world was already abuzz. News outlets had picked up the story, and social media was in a frenzy. Keanu was no longer just a beloved movie star, he was now the face of a revolution, a battle not just for his own career, but for the soul of Hollywood itself. But as the media began to champion Keanu's cause, a darker side of the industry was stirring. The very people who had been implicated in the corruption scandal weren't going to sit idly by. Keanu knew they would fight back. The question was how far they were willing to go to protect their empire. As the days passed, Keanu and Olivia continued to prepare for the legal battle ahead. They met with their legal team, strategizing how to present the evidence in the most compelling way possible. The pressure was mounting, but Olivia's steady presence gave Keanu a sense of calm. She had lived through the trenches of Hollywood and knew how to play the game, except this time, the game had changed. "We've got the evidence," Olivia said one afternoon as they sat in a quiet conference room, reviewing a new batch of documents. "But we need to make sure we're ready for the retaliation. You know they won't go down without a fight." Keanu nodded. He had been prepared for the inevitable backlash, but he knew that the stakes were higher now. The industry's power players would stop at nothing to protect themselves and their investments. "What's the next move?" Keanu asked, his voice steady. "We continue to push," Olivia said, her eyes narrowing with resolve. "We bring more people into this. There are other insiders, people who have been waiting for someone like you to stand up. If we can get them to speak out, it'll be a game changer." But as Olivia spoke, Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. He had seen enough of the Hollywood machine to know that when it felt threatened, it would lash out in ways that no one could predict. The very next morning, Keanu's worst fears were realized. The industry had begun to fight back, and it was hitting hard. The first attack came from a familiar source, one of Hollywood's most influential studio executives, Michael Raines. Raines had always been a name Keanu had respected, at least from a distance. He was a powerful player in the industry, known for his hands-on approach and influence in every major studio deal. But now, Raines was using his power to discredit everything Keanu and Olivia had exposed. A press release was issued under Raines' name, painting Keanu as a disgruntled actor with a personal vendetta against Hollywood. The statement claimed that Keanu was using a fabricated scandal to remain relevant, and that he had no real understanding of the industry's inner workings. It accused him of being manipulated by opportunistic figures like Olivia Masters, casting doubt on her credibility as well. The press, eager for a new angle, ran with the story. Within hours, social media was flooded with harsh criticism of Keanu, calling him a has-been, and accusing him of attacking the very industry that had made him a star. The narrative was being spun, and the world seemed to be turning against him. Keanu sat in his office, staring at the headlines that flashed across his phone screen. He could feel the weight of the media backlash pressing down on him. His public image, which had always been one of kindness and integrity, was now under siege. But what bothered him more than the headlines was the way Raines had positioned Olivia in the press release. He knew the studio exec was trying to weaken their alliance, to turn public opinion against them. If the industry could destroy their credibility, the truth would be buried once more. "What do we do now?" Keanu asked Olivia, who had just walked into his office, her face a mask of determination. Olivia was calm despite the chaos swirling around them. "We push back harder. We release more evidence. We show people the truth they're trying to hide. This is just the beginning, Keanu." Keanu looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "I'm not going to let them win. We're doing this for everyone who's been silenced. For all the people who have suffered." In the following days, Keanu and Olivia made their next move. They released a video to the public, a carefully edited compilation of footage and documents that showcased the systemic corruption within Hollywood. They included testimonies from anonymous whistleblowers, people who had worked on film sets and witnessed the behind-the-scenes manipulation and exploitation. The video hit the internet like a bombshell. Within hours, it went viral, racking up millions of views. The public's reaction was overwhelmingly supportive. People from across the globe rallied behind Keanu, sharing the video on social media with hashtags like #HollywoodExposed and #TruthAboveAll. Fans who had once been skeptical now found themselves on Keanu's side, drawn in by the overwhelming evidence and his unwavering conviction. But the industry was far from done. A few days later, a new attack came, this time, more personal. Keanu's private life, which had always been closely guarded, was suddenly thrust into the public eye. Tabloid articles began to circulate, fabricating rumors about his personal relationships and spreading lies about his past. The attacks were cruel, designed to distract and discredit him in the eyes of his supporters. Olivia was livid when she saw the headlines. "They're trying to break you," she said, pacing around Keanu's office. "They'll use anything, to make you look like a joke." Keanu remained calm, his expression steady as he read the gossip. He knew exactly what the industry was doing. They were trying to discredit him, break him emotionally, and turn the public against him. But he wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. "We don't fight with tabloids," Keanu said quietly. "We keep our eyes on the truth. Let the people see who's really behind all of this." Olivia nodded, her resolve hardening. "You're right. This is bigger than us. It's bigger than anything they can throw at us." As the media frenzy continued to escalate, Keanu's resolve only grew stronger. He knew that the battle was far from over, and that the industry would stop at nothing to protect its secrets. But as long as he had Olivia by his side, and as long as the truth was on his side, he knew they could not be silenced. The stakes had never been higher, and the industry's retaliation was growing more intense. But Keanu and Olivia had no intention of backing down. The final showdown was coming. The tension in the air was palpable as Keanu and Olivia walked into the courtroom for what would be the most important day of their fight. The case had reached a boiling point. The evidence was undeniable, the media circus was in full swing, and the entire entertainment industry was on the edge of its seat, watching every move Keanu and Olivia made. The stakes had never been higher. Keanu could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on him. This was the culmination of everything they had fought for, the culmination of all the risks, the sacrifices, and the hard truths they had uncovered. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about exposing the truth for everyone who had been silenced, for every person in the industry who had been exploited, manipulated, and discarded. As Keanu took his seat at the defendant's table, his legal team was already preparing their final arguments. Olivia stood at his side, her presence a steady reminder of why they had started this fight in the first place. Despite the media frenzy and the smear campaigns aimed at tearing them apart, they remained united, their resolve unshaken. The courtroom was filled with anticipation. The judge called the session to order, but there was a new energy in the room, a sense that everything was about to change. The industry had fought back hard, but now it was time for the final move. Keanu's legal team began to present their closing arguments. The evidence they had gathered, thanks to Olivia's courageous decision to come forward, was irrefutable. The tapes, the emails, the testimonies, the financial records, they all painted a clear picture of a system built on corruption, exploitation, and lies. But it wasn't just the evidence that had the room on edge. It was the bombshell that Keanu had been waiting to drop. "Your Honor," Keanu's lead attorney, Ryan, began, "we have one final piece of evidence, one that will conclusively prove the extent of the corruption that has been allowed to fester within this industry. A piece of evidence that links the very highest levels of power to the exploitation of vulnerable individuals." The room fell silent. The tension was so thick that you could almost feel it in the air. Ryan turned to Keanu and nodded. This was it, the moment when everything changed. Keanu stood up, his hands steadied despite the pressure. He had come this far, and now there was no turning back. He took a deep breath and walked to the stand, his heart pounding in his chest. He looked out over the courtroom. The faces staring back at him were a mix of skepticism, intrigue, and curiosity. The judge's eyes were fixed on him, waiting for what he would say next. "Ladies and gentlemen," Keanu began, his voice calm but filled with determination, "for years, I've been a part of an industry that claimed to be about art, about creativity, about storytelling. But what I've come to realize is that it's been about something else entirely. It's been about control, about power, and about exploiting those who are too afraid to speak out." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "For the past several months, I've been fighting not just for my own dignity, but for the countless others who've been silenced. For the actors, the crew members, the people who make this industry what it is, only to be discarded when they're no longer useful. I'm not the first to suffer, but I refuse to be the last." The room was still. Keanu could feel the eyes of every person in the room on him, hanging on to every word. This was the truth, raw and unfiltered, and he was ready to let it all out. He turned to face the judge and continued, "But today, I'm not here to just expose the corruption. I'm here to tell you about the people behind it. The people who pulled the strings, who created this system, and who have been profiting off the pain of others. And I have proof." With a motion from his lawyer, the final piece of evidence was revealed, a hidden recording, one that had been made years ago, but had never seen the light of day. The recording captured a conversation between some of the most powerful figures in Hollywood, figures who had long been untouchable. As the recording played, the courtroom listened in stunned silence. The figures in the conversation spoke openly about their manipulation of contracts, the exploitation of young talent, and their deliberate attempts to silence anyone who dared to speak out. They laughed about their power and discussed how they kept the system rigged in their favor. It was a damning confession, and it left no room for doubt. When the recording ended, there was a collective gasp. The room was in chaos, the weight of the evidence crashing down like a tidal wave. Keanu stood tall, his heart racing. He had just done the unthinkable, he had exposed the very people who had controlled the industry for years. And now, there was no way to turn back. The truth was out. The aftermath was swift and unforgiving. Within hours, the media exploded with coverage of the bombshell evidence. The names of the industry's elite were being dragged through the mud, their reputations in tatters. The public's reaction was overwhelming. Keanu had become a hero, a symbol of the power of truth in the face of corruption. But as the dust settled, the real work began. Keanu knew that this was only the beginning. The industry would fight to protect its secrets, and the people responsible for the corruption wouldn't go down without a fight. But Keanu and Olivia had already set something in motion that could never be undone. They had taken on the system and won, and now they had to ensure that the truth continued to be heard. In the weeks that followed, several high-profile figures were forced to step down from their positions, and investigations into the corruption within Hollywood deepened. Keanu's legal victory sent a message to the industry that things could no longer remain the same. The people who had once been untouchable were now being held accountable. But for Keanu, the victory wasn't just about winning in court. It was about something much more profound. As he sat with Olivia in his apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened, he knew that this journey had changed him. He had gone from being a beloved actor to a whistleblower, and in doing so, he had uncovered a deeper truth about himself, and about the industry he had once adored. "Thanks for everything," Keanu said, looking at Olivia with gratitude in his eyes. "None of this would have been possible without you." Olivia smiled, her eyes filled with warmth. "You did this, Keanu. You were the one who had the courage to stand up. I was just here to help you see it through." Keanu looked out the window, his thoughts drifting. The world was changing. Hollywood was changing. And though there was still much to be done, he knew that he had done something that would inspire others to keep fighting. As he looked back at the legal battles, the media storms, and the personal attacks, he couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The truth had won. And with that, the story of Keanu's fight against the system came to a close, not with an end, but with a new beginning. "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from," the narrator said once more, as the screen faded to black. What do you think? Has Keanu and Olivia's fight changed Hollywood forever? Or will the industry find a way to fight back? The truth may always find a way out, but the battle is never truly over.